family dynamics, family governance, and all these great descriptions, what is very important and for successful families. That are the topics for today's Global Wisdom Talk. And I'm very, very grateful that I have Elizabeth Begger today in our talk. She joined us from Denmark today. And good morning to you, Elizabeth. And before we jump in this very important topics, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. So yes, I am speaking to you from Denmark, which is where I was born, and grew up here, started my working life in my family business. Later, I moved to London, tried my hand at a few other things, and quickly found my way back to the family business world.
Yeah.
I worked for a family business organization for 13 years before I set up my own consulting practice. And I've been running that from Mexico and the US for the past 4 years.
Yeah. And you are writing a book, right?
I
About,
am. I'm writing a book about family dynamics. So, yeah, the conversation is very topical.
yeah, that's great. So probably we can have a view or a snapshot on your book later on. So let's start this kind of discussion because I'm very curious about because the whole majority is talking about family governance, family dynamics, and yes, undoubtedly, family governance is just what I called the success engine of each successful families. But in reality, I mean, there isn't, in many cases, there isn't just a strong engine implemented in the family. And more often, it comes up with the term, yeah, our family dynamics are so negative and so, on the other side, so powerful. So, Elizabeth, can you give us just your perspective? What is family dynamics? What is family governance in your perspective?
Great. Thank you for that question. So, the family dynamics to me, um, it speaks to the relationships that people have with each other. It speaks to, how people show up with each other, and then that also touches on the beliefs that we hold and the assumptions that we make about ourselves, each other, and how we relate. So really, family dynamics are about the relationships, and family governance is about the rules that we make or the guidelines that we put in place for how we're going to interact together around the business. So there is a need for family governance when you own something together, when you do something, when you're trying to do something collectively, then having those guidelines or rules, people can choose different words depending on what feels right to them, but having those agreements in place for how we talk about things, how we talk to each other, and then how we make decisions about the things we need to make decisions about. So one over here is really the relationships and how we interact and how we see ourselves and each other. And over here, it's the sort of the rule book we put in place for how we are going to do something collectively and achieve something collectively.
So, if I say, if we as a family come together and it is just now the time to come to a decision, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. Dynamics pops up, right? Because each individual have different perspective, different interests. Um, how interact these dynamics with decision making and how I can use dynamic pathways, for instance, to come to a good decision. Do you have any example from your work what you can share with us?
A really nice example springs to mind in terms of, making decisions together. I worked with a family who wanted to look at their philanthropic endeavors. The parents had been very successful and they had built the business and they wanted everybody in the family, including their children who were adults, to do something philanthropic. The parents had their own sort of projects of choice. And it wasn't that they wanted the kids to do the same, they just wanted the kids to do something. And they had never really managed to have that conversation. They all lived in the same village and they had very good relationships with each other, but they found themselves in a situation where every time they tried to have a family business related meeting, they ended up having a family conversation. And I think that's very normal.
Yeah.
Other things got in the way, like who's going to walk the dogs and all of those things, which were also part and parcel of how that family interacted together. And what I did for them was really only to hold a space and guide the conversation back to what they wanted to talk about, nothing more. But sometimes the third party is needed for that. And they discovered the parents were worried that their children weren't interested in doing philanthropy. But what they discovered was the children, the adult children, had their own projects that they really felt very strongly about. So when I was done working with them, everybody felt calm because the parents knew that their kids were very philanthropic and that was what they were hoping for. And the children got to do it their own way. So each son did something with their own nuclear families. So that really worked out very well. But it was just a case of them giving time and space to the right conversations and listening to each other and hearing that everything I was hoping for is already there. We just haven't set time aside to and given enough focus to the conversation. So sometimes that's all that's needed, like somebody to come in, hold the conversation and guide the conversation. Other times, of course, it's a little trickier than that, and you'll find that there are old assumptions creeping into meetings that are affecting decision making. So it could either be from the generation, the current generation, like you're my little brother and you were annoying when you were 5 and I can't see you as head of, I don't know, finance or, so those dynamics will play out where we simply can't switch out of the way that we see our siblings because of how we saw them when we grew up. Other times it comes from the past and things get passed on generation after generation. So something could have happened in the grandparents' generation that just gets passed on. And we know this, it happens in all families. You don't
Right.
need business to experience that. But where we really need to hold a space and let those things surface and let those things be healed before we can move on to making solid decisions together. So where there are important decisions to be made, we really need to look at are the relationships in a position where they can do that meaningfully. Because I have seen examples, not clients that I've worked with, but people I have met where, the wrong CEO was appointed because the family, everybody got so entrenched and they just wanted what they wanted. And it didn't really have anything to do with the best for the business, but the emotions get in the way of things.
Is it correct if I argue if there is just, I would call it just a weak vision or a weak impact goal, a long-term long goal for the family. That opens the room for what I've called negative dynamics that can destroy the entire family potentially. But if you have just in strong, positive, visionary impact goal, potentially positive dynamics arise. And there are other discussions what you want to found. Is my perception correct, or is it too easy to say?
I think there's something very powerful in what you're saying because a strong purpose that people are aligned around, that people feel excited enough about to sometimes put their own opinions aside for a higher goal. Definitely, there is a strong truth to that. I think what I have seen is that if you have a strong purpose, if you have reasonably good governance structures in place, formal or informal, but something is there. And if you also work on your family relationships, those three things will make for a very, very strong family business. I think on their own, purpose or governance or dynamics are not as strong, but when you combine them, it becomes like you become unstoppable. Purpose is definitely part of that conversation because it rallies people around something bigger than themselves and bigger than an issue that is going on in the family. And I do believe that if you have a strong purpose, it is, propelling everybody forward in the same direction. but without also working on the relationships and some decision-making structures, purpose alone may not always do it.
So here's just one thought. What drives me at this time? Not crazy, but curious. I mean, the whole world is talking about these great wealth transfer. What is standing in front of the door? It's just on move or stuff like that. I have two separate, I would just projectionists. Yes, that is the greatest wealth transfer, the first greatest wealth transfer in history. But yes, it is the first, and the second is standing in front of the door. And it will be much larger, it will be inflect more families. And it is not only, I mean, some voices talk, yeah, that first wealth transfer is only concentrated on North America and some specific families. Yeah, could be, maybe, I don't know, right? Because nobody have the exact data. So I mean, in the end of the day, if you transfer that meteor, what I've called, coming from Jay Hughes' description, is that you transfer also relationships, because that is inside of these meteor. And on your perspective and on your projecting, what these wealth transfer actually means in regards of family dynamics and family governance. Is this just a greater risk that many families will be explode on this potentially burden in regards of family dynamics, because so many questions arise automatically if this meteor will hit the individual or the family?
Great question. Thank you. And I will start with an example from years ago. It was not a family I worked with, but it was a family I met with. And they, again, the parents had been extremely successful and were now, at this point when I met with them, very interested in their philanthropic work.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Scandinavian family. And as Scandinavians, we have certain beliefs about what to, wealth, and, we are very cautious about talking about it. We're very cautious about how we approach wealth, and also how children are introduced to it. And this particular family had a family business, family office. The parents had, as I said, been very successful. And they said to me, we wanted our sons, who were in their 40s at the time, to grow up with big hearts, not big pockets.
Mm.
Beautiful intention.
Mm.
So they hadn't really spoken to their sons about the family business. The sons had no idea how successful the parents had been. Very, very noble way to think about life, because I think a lot of parents are afraid that they will create entitlement and other things if they're open about the wealth. Another example I'll just add to this, just to prove that point, is I spoke to one of the corporate partners we had at the family business organization I was involved in. This was years ago. And he said we had an intern. The parents had asked, this was a client of theirs, the parent had asked for this child to come in and intern with them. He turned up on day one and looked up the family on the database that this particular service provider had, saw the family's net worth, said,
Mm.
I don't think I need to be here, and he walked out. Because obviously it was a very wealthy family and he had no idea just how wealthy they were. So those are the things that people are just so afraid of creating, and I get that. And that's why sometimes parents choose not to talk about it. But if you want to prepare your successors, if you want to prepare your heirs for what they are going to own at some point, you do need to talk about it. You do need to be upfront about it. But I think there's a huge amount of other things that we can do. Like if these two children from the previous example had been introduced to what the family owned and had been educated at the same time about how to steward it, the outcome might have been different because the parents found themselves in the situation where they were a little bit upset that things hadn't worked out the way that they had hoped. And I think the only reason that was the case was because alongside, sharing what we own, we then also have to educate, we have to prepare. And it's not fair, I think, to hand something over if you then also give people a chance to understand how to protect it, steward it, nurture it. Because if you go from not really understanding your family's wealth to suddenly being an ultra high net worth individual, that can turn into a burden. That can be very hard because none of us have an innate understanding of how to do that.
Right.
So for this wealth transfer, I think you do inherit so many things from your parents, not just the wealth. And thinking about it in terms of how can I make sure my children are prepared to deal with this is probably a big part of the answer. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, and let me continue this at this point. I will bring just the argument, and quite it could be a little bit provocative, that the family of the future will have nothing to do with the family from the past. On the one hand, is I had this interesting discussion also. In the future, there is just, or raise the question, what is actually a family?
Hmm.
Right? We never had these kind of discussion in the past. I've never imagined. I had, because we are taught that family, there's the father, the mother, the kids, and stuff like that. In the future, probably something new. The main interesting point, and that brings me to my next question to you, is that what I recognize that I call it the new generation of families. They are more intentionally. What I've learned is, and I repeat it in so many talks, that these guys and these families don't talk about legacy and purpose. Because what I learned is, one family member said to me, yeah, legacy what was built up by my parents, and it was just the paperwork. There wasn't any action, or very few actions. He said to me, I'm only interested how I can be relevant, how I can stay significant, and how I can stay influential on a positive impact. Because he said to me, I mean, if you take an outlook over the next decade or so, we will see so many families with significant wealth. And what I mean by this is just significant wealth. It's just, in my interpretation, more than 100 million in US or dollars. It is what it is, right? And he said to me, we will compare ourselves not on how many money we have in our bank account. We will compare ourselves in our community, what kind of projects we fund. This is just a complete different perspective. But in many of these discussions, and the question arises is, okay, what does it mean actually for the dynamic part of the families? Is it just a switch more into positive, or is it just more a switch into that can be more complicated? Because if you are sitting on the table with, let's say, 5 individuals and each is so intentional, there's so many power on the table and so many dynamics. How do you handle this? How do you find a path to come to indecision? What is your projection on this, just as an outlook of what we see?
That's a super interesting question. I think I think there is immense power in intention and being an intentional family. Um, so my thoughts are that when we bring people together as a collective, let's say a family unit in this instance, or a family group, um, they all come with their own feelings, thoughts, needs, wants for their own lives, the lives of their nuclear family, and then there's the collective on top of that, or in addition to that. And I think it really comes down to what are we going to do collectively and how do we find those projects. But then we also need to allow for the fact that there are other things that we will do individually. It's a bit like values. Like I can maybe sign up to my family values, my family business values, but it doesn't mean that I don't have other values too. I am an individual. So I think it's about giving space to the individuals and what they want, and then harnessing those things that we can do together and letting those coexist with the things that we will do separately. So you are still an individual with your own intentions and your own purpose in life in general. And then you have it over here where you do something together. So I think to your point, because I heard you say something about legacy and no action. So I think that's a really interesting point and also a bit of a dangerous thing to do in a family business. If we say something but we don't back it up with action, the next generation see that and they don't want to be part of that. So if we look at legacy, if we look at purpose, those things have to be lived. Same with governance. If we put governance in place and we don't live it, people see it, and those are the real dangers. That's when the alarm bells need to start to go off. Like if we say we do something and we don't do it, the next generation see it and it turns them off.
Yeah.
So the family of the future, I think, has to be a family of intent and action. If we say we do this, we do it. It's better to say we do 3 things and do them well than 10 things and not do any of them or only do 5. It's much better to be aligned around these are the 3 things we do. But I think for the future, I think we'll continue to families will probably continue to be families in the same way that we've seen for a long time. The outer sort of focus might shift as the world shifts, but fundamentally, we have a need to belong to the people we call family, whomever they are. And we'll continue to react when we don't feel that we're part of that family that we want to be part of, and we'll continue to support when we do. And I think those things will stay, but in the external world, obviously things will shift and we might use different words. But fundamentally, I think allowing for people to be individuals and be part of the collective is where the real engine room is.
And let me add the thought, just as my projection for the future. On the one hand, that is what I'm standing for, is just we will see more tribes, more tribal families. Because if you want to do more intentionally, you are more open to structure your family as an open system. Yes, that is not so easy. I can speak from my own experience, but that is just a way also to preserve your family, right, over generations. On the second hand, is just if we are seeing more tribal families, I mean, a tribe itself has a lot of power because they have a vision. I mean, the history taught us this. And that means also that we need a new force of advisors. In some cases, they do their own lead by their own example. And also what this means is actually that we will see an increase in competition amongst families. That the family itself will be a new status symbol, not the money, because the money is just, I mean, it's just there because it's just the ocean, right? And that is what I see in some cases a shift. That wasn't just obviously in the first generation wealth creator that we have all this and we will only protect this and we are only by our own self. And in some cases, and that is just the bridge. And if you want, and I'm very much look forward if you come bring us just in a snapshot in your book, what does it mean actually for the dynamic part of the family? I mean, is it just the question more arise how I can cultivate positive dynamic in my family? What can I do as a family leader to cultivate these positive family dynamic? If we are aligned that dynamics bring us towards to our goal, drives us, give us new energy and stuff like that. Is this just in a part also in your new book?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I really like the question. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with someone many, many years ago. And he said to me, well, you cannot love what you do not know. So we take great care to introduce the next generation to the family and the business. And that phrase always stuck with me because it's very true. You know, how can we expect people to want to be part of something in one way or another? It doesn't mean you always have to work in the business or you always have to sit on the family council, but how can we ask people to give their hearts and minds to something if they don't actually understand it, if they don't know what it's about? So I think that's a really important piece. And then I've interviewed about 35 family business owners so far, and one of them from a large family said to me, what we're trying to do is to really make people fall in love with the family business. And I just loved that and spoke to that other phrase I just mentioned that, you know, when we do that, when we cultivate those positive feelings, and when we leave the door open for disagreements and say, okay, we're not afraid of disagreements, but the focus is on the positive. I think you're creating something incredibly powerful. And I've interviewed, you know, first to second generation businesses and much older businesses. And of course, things are a little bit easier in some respects in a younger family business because everybody grew up under well, not everybody grew up, but the children grew up under the same roof with their parents, whom they now work with.
Yeah.
So there is a very close relationship. There's an understanding of the values that children may also have seen the foundation of the business. They saw the parents going to work in the business. So that sense of, and this is another thing that's really come out of the interviews, is that gratitude is enormously powerful. When we're grateful for the business, we're grateful to be part of it, we're grateful for the family we grew up in. And it doesn't mean that we don't see that there are also things that could be different. You know, it's not about, you know, rose-tinted spectacles here, but when we cultivate and when we feel grateful, when we feel like I am blessed to be part of this, we show up in a certain way. And that is very beneficial to the business too, and is obviously very beneficial to the family. And continuing to cultivate those things. And over time, you know, we might move away from the city we grew up in, we might move away from the country we grew up in, and therefore we're not in the same proximity to the family and the business, but then helping people to fall in love with what we do together. And that could be the business itself because we love that we employ a lot of people. It could be the philanthropic projects we get involved in because we love what we do to help other communities, or we just love to show up with the family because I'm an artist and I get to create the artwork for the next family meeting, whatever it is. But cultivating those things will really cultivate that connection that we're looking to create when we want to be a tribe as a family. And I think you're right. I totally agree that having that sense of belonging to a family rather than it just being about money, I think is much more compelling, much stronger, and has a much more sort of positive impact on people's lives.
Absolutely, absolutely. And and can you tell me what is actually your mission with your book?
Yeah, thank you. So if I may, I'll just share a little bit about why I decided to write it. So, in my previous role, working with many family businesses in a family business organization, I saw a lot of examples of people coming to us saying, who should we talk to? Because we have the constitution, we did set up the council, we've got this process or that plan in place, but people aren't sticking to it, back to your point earlier about the legacy and no follow through. So I saw that again and again, and I thought to myself, what is it that gets in the way? Why is it that when people have spent time and money and put their hearts and minds into creating this document that should help them, that then just doesn't, and it actually makes it worse than before when they didn't have an agreement in place? So what is it? And I kept seeing that it was the relationships, it was the trust or the issues from the past or something human got in the way of the structures being supportive to the family. So I thought to myself, maybe we just don't talk enough about family dynamics. We talk a lot about structure. We talk a lot about process. We talk a lot about purpose, which is great. We talk a lot about everything else, but the family dynamics, the human relationships, which is the most maybe perhaps intangible because you can't really see it. You can't really put it down on paper. And also, it's the most painful when it doesn't work. So I thought when I started my consulting business, I want to lead with something that supports the family dynamics. I want to give space to that to emerge because in the process of writing things down and that we're going to agree on, these things are going to come up. It's just human nature. So my purpose with this book is my whole goal is to support family businesses to move from those family dynamics that aren't working the way they'd like them to a much better, more fun place to be. So I hope that my book will contribute to families thinking, okay, these are some of the ways in which we can cultivate this, and also to see themselves in some of the challenges that I describe and go, we're not alone. We're not the only ones. There's nothing wrong with us just because we live through this. This is normal. So let's normalize the challenges and let's find ways of moving towards the positive. So that's really the point of the book.
So, what I can say to you, Elizabeth, I'm very grateful that you make a spotlight on this, and that you put your effort and your time, because that's your greatest treasure, to write a book on this important topic. Why? What I see in so many cases that so many terms, words, structures, you name it, we make this so complicated for the families, right? Not for the benefit for the families, just for the benefit of the and the advantage of the advisor. And that is just from my projection, not the right way. Come together and make it easier to understand, right? And if you have described your mission and your purpose with your book, there was a thought pops up in my mind. I've read a very brilliant article about family culture as a main part of family governance. But if you see in that in so many discussion, so many people talk only about the governance and forget the culture, right? And there was a study, I guess it was 5 or 6 years ago, that 65% of all family governances failed within 3 months. And families have paid so many high fees for the advisors to set up structures, and in the end of the day, it doesn't work because they forget the family culture, right? And I see this interaction between dynamics, culture, governance, all interacts together, right? And bring it just in a flywheel, right? But have the right view on all pieces of the puzzle. And that is also what I see. That is also my wish for the future, that we put all the pieces together for the family. Because what you see, I mean, one guy is talking about governance, one is talking is about philanthropy, the other whatever. Only pieces of the puzzle, right? Nobody is there to say, okay, I put all this together in the picture for you, that you see, okay, each of them are interact with another. And it is important also, right? But to set up a ground foundation, what is really important? That all the colors will become powerful, right? And and that is just what we need also for the families of the future. So I've very much enjoyed our discussion today, Elizabeth. And before we jump out, I will come up with my final question. And maybe that can be a little challenging for you. So, my final question is to you. If you and I have the opportunity to meet us in 500 years from now, what is your perception? How will they look like? What look like in regards of the individuals with wealth, the families, and society. Can you give us just your wish, your outlook, how the world does look like in 500 years from now?
In 500 years, wow, that's a powerful question. In 500 years, I hope, so I'll start with my hope for all of us, for humanity, is that obviously there is far more peace than there is now, but that we have transitioned into a place as human beings where we are far more connected to ourselves, our emotions, and each other through a connection with ourselves first and foremost, and that through those connections that we have built a society that is based on a heart connection rather than a mind connection. I think we will see far more tribes of choice, although 500 years from now, it's really hard to say, but tribes of choice. I think we will have structures of society around things that matter to us. So, yes, we'll probably always belong to a family of some kind. But at the same time, I think we will also belong to tribes of heart connection. So, and those tribes may be just as powerful as the family of origin of whatever kind that we have. That's what I imagine. I really imagine that we will shift at some point, we will shift from leading from here to leading from the heart. I think that's where we're going, although maybe society doesn't reflect that right now. But I do think that sometimes, this is my own personal thought, is that we're needing to see all the stuff that has been getting in the way. And we're seeing that out in the world right now. We're seeing that, okay, there's all this disconnection that we have felt as a humanity, really. And this is just showing us what we need to heal so that we can move into heart connection. And so society will be very different in 500 years. That I do believe.
Great, great. Excellent. So many, many thanks, Elizabeth. Best greetings to Denmark. And I'm very much looking forward to your book. When will it published, actually? When it is
I
planned?
don't have a date yet because I'm still doing my research. I'd like to think that sometime in the next 18 months, but I am a new author, so I don't want to promise something I won't be able to deliver, but I am feeling extremely passionate and excited about it. So I will be starting the writing relatively soon.
Great. Many, many thanks and all the best to Denmark.
Thank you for having me. All the best to you too.